Alyssa Morgan had never expected to return to the small town she once called home. She had left it behind at 19. Full of dreams and sharp edges, convinced that there was nothing in the quiet ranch life that could ever make her stay. She loved the noise of the city, the lights that never went out, the feeling that everything moved fast enough to match her heartbeat. For years she lived in tiny apartments with big hopes, worked long hours, and tried to build a future that looked nothing like the dusty land she grew up on. But life has a strange way of pulling people back to the places they try to forget. When her father's doctor called, her world shifted in an instant. His health had weakened. He needed help. The ranch needed help. And she was the only one left to answer the call. So she packed her bags, locked the apartment she worked so hard to afford, and drove for hours until the tall buildings disappeared in her rearview mirror. The long stretch of highway that led to home felt unfamiliar, like a road from another lifetime. When she finally saw the old wooden sign that marked the Morgan Ranch, her stomach twisted. The sign was faded, leaning slightly, as though it too had grown tired. The house looked smaller than she remembered. The windmill creaked as it turned slowly. Fences leaned, grass grew unevenly, and the barn roof sagged. It was clear the land needed strong hands, steady feet, and someone who understood its language. Alyssa wasn't sure she was any of those things anymore. Her father greeted her with a tired smile. His eyes warm but shadowed. He tried to stand tall, pretending he was stronger than he felt, but she could see the weakness in the way he moved. He had always been the strongest person she knew. The kind of man who could lift a hay bale with one arm and brush off problems with the other. Seeing him like this made her chest tighten with worry. She promised him she would help. She told him she could handle anything. She wanted him to believe in her the way he used to. But inside, she felt like she was standing in a world she no longer understood. Everything here had a rhythm she had forgotten how early mornings felt, how animals relied on you, how the land demanded both patience and knowledge. The first day, she tried to hide her panic by staying busy. She walked the ranch to see what needed fixing. Almost everything did. The gates were rusting, the water troughs were low, the paths were overgrown. She made a long list in her notebook, hoping lists would bring order to the chaos. But the truth was simple. Lists didn't repair fences. Lists didn't calm anxious cattle. Lists didn't make her a rancher again. She tried anyway. She woke up before sunrise and pulled on the old work boots she had once worn as a teenager. They felt heavier than she remembered. She fed the animals, carried buckets, and tried to remember how to operate the old equipment. Most of it looked like it belonged in a museum, not a working ranch. Her first real mistake came when she tried to fix a broken latch on one of the gates. She had watched her father do it dozens of times when she was young, and she assumed it would be simple. But as she tugged at the metal piece, the entire gate swung open, and a few nervous cows began drifting toward the open field. Her heart jumped. She tried to herd them back, waving her arms and calling softly, but they only looked at her with calm, confused eyes. She realized with embarrassment that she didn't even know the right way to guide them. Her father, watching from a distance, slowly walked over and helped with quiet patience, not saying a word about her mistake. His silence felt kinder than any comment he could have made. Still, the small failure stayed with her. She felt clumsy and out of place, like a guest in her own childhood home. The townspeople noticed her return quickly. In small towns, news travels without effort. When she went to the local supply store, she met familiar faces, neighbors who had watched her grow up, old classmates who had stayed instead of leaving, and people she barely recognized who already seemed to know everything about her. Some welcomed her warmly, happy to see a Morgan back at the ranch. Others were polite, but distant. A few whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. They wondered if she was strong enough. They wondered if she could fix what was broken. They wondered if she even planned to stay. Alyssa tried not to let the whispers bother her, but they sank deeper than she wanted to admit. She had always been stubborn, always determined to look capable even when she was struggling. So she smiled, nodded, and told everyone she was fine. But the truth was simple. She felt like a stranger in a life that used to be hers. Her biggest challenge came on a day when the sun was already high and the heat pressed hard against the earth. She was trying to move a piece of old ranch equipment, a heavy metal tool that had rusted into place. She pulled and pushed, wiped sweat from her forehead, and gathered all her strength. The equipment didn't budge. She tried again, this time with more force, and nearly lost her balance. For a moment she stood still, catching her breath, feeling frustration burn behind her eyes. She wanted to prove she could handle the ranch alone, that she didn't need help from anyone. Especially not from the cowboys who had stayed behind, the same ones who once teased her for dreaming of city life. She didn't want to give them another reason to doubt her. End quote. But the ranch did not care about pride. The land did not soften just because she was trying her best. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her from a distance. A figure on horseback had slowed as he approached the property, noticing her struggle. She didn't hear the horse's hooves at first. Only when he was close enough did she turn. Startled. Caleb Rios had returned to town recently, though she had not seen him yet. He had once worked on the ranch years ago. Before leaving abruptly, people still talked about him, but he kept to himself. His presence was calm, steady, and quiet, very different from the loud confidence of her youth. He didn't say anything at first. He simply dismounted, walked over, and studied the equipment she had been trying to move. Alyssa stiffened, embarrassed and defensive. "I've got it," she said quickly. "I didn't say you didn't," Caleb replied in a gentle tone. His voice was low and warm, without judgment. He examined the rusted metal and nodded toward the spot where it was stuck. "It's wedged. Happens when it sits too long. You just need the right angle." She stepped aside reluctantly, watching as he leaned into the equipment with practiced strength. With one smooth pull, the piece shifted. Not easily, but certainly more easily than she had managed. He wasn't showing off, he was simply familiar with work she had forgotten how to do. A flush rose to her cheeks. She wasn't used to feeling unskilled or unsteady. "Thanks," she said quietly. He nodded and stepped back, giving her space. "If you need anything, I'm around," he said before returning to his horse. His words lingered long after he left. She didn't want help, but she also couldn't deny the truth. The ranch needed more hands than hers, and she wasn't sure she could do everything alone. That night, she sat on the porch with the soft glow of the porch light warming her face. Her father had gone to bed early. The stars above the ranch shone brighter than any city light ever could. She listened to the crickets, the wind brushing through the tall grass, the distant sounds of the animals settling in for the night. This was the home she had left behind. This was the life she didn't think she wanted. And yet, here she was tired, overwhelmed, but somehow still determined. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she could save the ranch. But she knew one thing. She would try. Even if the land challenged her, even if the townspeople doubted her, even if her pride got bruised along the way. She wasn't the same girl who had run away years ago. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a new place for herself here, even if she needed a little help, whether she liked it or not. Caleb Rios rode into town quietly, the way he did most things in life. He had been gone for years, long enough for people to forget the details of his departure, but not long enough for them to stop wondering. His return stirred curiosity, but he kept his distance from most conversations. He didn't come back to be noticed. He came back because life had guided him in a slow, unexpected circle, returning him to the place where he once felt both comfort and burden. He was different now, older, calmer, and carrying experiences he rarely spoke about. When he left years ago, He was trying to outrun memories he wasn't ready to face. But time has a way of softening the edges of old stories. And now, he was ready to rebuild a quieter life, one step at a time. The first week he returned, he kept to himself. He rented a small room behind the feed store and took simple jobs helping ranchers nearby. He didn't ask for more than fair pay and honest work. People respected that. Some greeted him with friendly nods, others with cautious smiles, unsure whether he planned to stay. But no one questioned his skill. Caleb had always been good with animals, land, and hard tasks that required patience. He didn't rush anything. He didn't raise his voice. He simply worked until the job was done. He heard whispers about Morgan Ranch before he ever stepped foot near it. People said the place needed help. They said the fences were weak, the equipment was old, and the owner, once strong and steady, was not doing well. And then came the part that caught his attention more than he admitted. Alyssa Morgan had returned. He remembered her clearly. Even after all this time, she had been a bright, ambitious girl who never accepted limits. She was always planning something bigger than the small town she grew up in. While others dreamed in half steps, she dreamed in leaps. He never imagined she would come back, and from what he heard, she hadn't imagined it either. So when he saw her struggling with the ranch equipment, he didn't approach out of curiosity. He approached because it was in his nature to help when someone needed it. But after that moment, he found himself thinking about her more than expected. The next few days, he kept his distance, giving her space to handle things her way. He knew better than to crowd someone trying to prove themselves. He also knew she had pride enough to work harder than she should, instead of asking for help. He understood that feeling too well. Still, he couldn't ignore what he saw. Alyssa was trying with everything she had, but the ranch required more than effort. It required experience. One hot afternoon, while riding past the Morgan property, he noticed her again. She was carrying 2 heavy buckets of water, too heavy for one person, and walking slowly toward the far pasture. Her shoulders were tense, her steps unsteady, and the sun was beating down hard. He watched her pause, set the buckets down, and breathe heavily. He didn't want to embarrass her by offering help again, so he kept riding. But something tugged at him. Maybe it was the memory of the determined young woman she once was. Maybe it was the tired expression on her face. Or maybe it was the simple truth that no one should have to handle everything alone. The next morning, he found himself saddling his horse earlier than usual. He packed a small toolkit and rode toward the Morgan Ranch, telling himself he would only fix a few things and leave. Not for her approval, but because the ranch deserved care, and her father had always treated him kindly. When he arrived, Alyssa was surprised but didn't say much. She wiped her hands on her jeans and looked at him with cautious eyes. "You don't have to come here," she said. "I know," he replied simply. "But I'm here anyway." She didn't argue after that. Instead, she watched him quietly as he inspected the fences. She noticed how he walked the land with natural ease, how he could spot a problem from a distance, how the animals seemed calmer around him. He didn't boast. He didn't correct her mistakes loudly. He just worked. She found it both humbling and strangely comforting. By midday, he had fixed 2 fence posts, cleared a clogged water trough, and secured a loose gate. Alyssa helped where she could, bringing him tools or steadying a board. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them felt surprisingly gentle, not awkward. When they finally took a break under a patch of shade, she looked at him with honest eyes. "You really didn't have to do this," she said again, softer this time. He brushed off the dust from his gloves. "Your father's a good man. This ranch meant something to him. I'm just giving a little back." "Das kam." She nodded, appreciating his answer more than she expected. Something about the way he spoke, simple, without hidden meaning, made her relax. Later in the week, the townspeople began noticing the small improvements at the Morgan Ranch. Someone commented on how the fencing looked straighter. Another mentioned The livestock seemed calmer. Alyssa didn't correct them or tell them who helped. She didn't want to spark rumors or create stories where none existed. But inside, she felt grateful. Still, she wasn't used to leaning on others. One evening, after a long day, she found herself replaying their interactions. Caleb didn't treat her like someone incapable. He didn't hover. He didn't take control away from her. He simply stepped in where help was needed and stepped back when it wasn't. It was a rare kind of kindness. One afternoon, she found him repairing an old tool shed door that had been sticking for months. She didn't ask him to do it. He just noticed the problem and fixed it. She stood by the doorway, watching him work with quiet focus. "You must think I'm terrible at this," she said suddenly. He looked up, surprised. "Why would I think that?" She gestured to the ranch, the tools, everything around them. "Because I can't do half the things you can do with ease." He paused for a moment, then leaned against the doorframe. "Alyssa, this isn't about being good or bad. It's about practice. You left this life for a long time. That doesn't mean you can't learn it again." Quote. She studied him, trying to understand why his words felt so reassuring. "You make it sound simple," she said quietly. "It is simple," he replied. "Not easy, but simple." Something inside her softened. She didn't know him well anymore, but she recognized the honesty in his eyes. It was the same honesty she remembered from years ago. Days turned into weeks, and Caleb became a regular presence at the ranch. Not every day, but often enough that Alyssa began to expect the sound of his horse approaching. They fell into a quiet routine, working side by side in the mornings, talking briefly in the afternoons, parting ways before evening settled in. She learned small things about him. He liked starting work early because the morning air felt fresh. He preferred simple meals. He didn't mind the heat, but disliked crowded places. He listened more than he spoke, and he carried a kind of calm that made even the hardest tasks feel less overwhelming. He learned things about her too. She pushed herself harder than she should. She cared deeply about her father. She felt pressure she never voiced. And she tried to manage everything alone because she didn't want to appear weak. One evening, while repairing a loose railing on the porch, Caleb glanced at Alyssa and asked, "Why is it so hard for you to ask for help?" She froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. "Because I wasn't supposed to come back like this," she said softly. "I was supposed to succeed. Out there. I wanted to return as someone strong, someone accomplished, not someone who needs help just to keep a ranch standing." He nodded slowly. "You're here. That's what matters." She looked at him, trying to read his expression. He wasn't judging her. He wasn't comparing her to anyone. He simply saw her exactly as she was and accepted it. And for the first time since returning home, she felt the heavy weight inside her shift just a little. Caleb didn't try to take over the ranch. He didn't try to lead her life. But he brought something she hadn't felt in a long time: support. Quiet, steady support that didn't ask for anything in return. She found herself looking forward to his presence, even when she didn't admit it out loud. Because with him there, the ranch didn't feel like an impossible mountain. It felt like something she could climb one step at a time. She wasn't sure what their connection meant or where it was leading. But she knew one thing. Clearly, Caleb wasn't just a cowboy passing through. He was becoming someone she relied on without meaning to. And that realization stayed with her long after the sun went down. The weather changed so quickly that even the older ranchers in town later said they didn't see it coming. One moment the sky was bright with wide stretches of open blue, and the next it darkened with heavy gray clouds rolling in from the distant hills. Alyssa noticed the shift while she and Caleb were checking the far pasture. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying a cold bite that didn't belong to the season. Caleb stopped walking and looked toward the horizon. His quiet expression tightened with concern. "A storm's coming faster than expected," he said. "We need to bring the cattle closer to shelter." Alyssa nodded, trusting his instincts. She had learned by now that he understood the land better than anyone she knew. They moved quickly, guiding the animals with calm motions. But the wind grew stronger, pushing against them like a warning. The sky dimmed until the field looked almost dusk-like, even though it was only early afternoon. The first drops of rain fell soon after, cold and heavy. Within minutes, the storm arrived with full force. Rain poured down in sheets, blurring their vision. The cattle grew restless, the wind howled, and thunder rumbled across the sky. Alyssa shivered as her clothes soaked through. Caleb stayed close, not with overprotective worry, but with steady awareness. He watched the land, the animals, and her, making sure none of them were in danger. "We should get to shelter," he said, raising his voice over the sound of the storm. Alyssa nodded. They hurried across the field, leaning into the wind. The bunkhouse was an old building that ranch hands had used decades ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy enough to keep them safe until the storm passed. When they reached the wooden door, Caleb pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The bunkhouse smelled like old wood and dust, but it felt warm compared to the cold rain outside. The wind rattled the walls gently, making the place feel even smaller. Alyssa brushed wet hair away from her face, breathing heavily. Caleb closed the door behind them, but when he tried to latch it, the handle wobbled. "It's loose," he muttered. The storm might push it open. Without hesitation, he slid off his belt, not in any dramatic way, but in a practical, focused manner. He looped it around the doorknob and a nearby support beam, pulling it tight until the door stayed firmly shut. Alyssa watched him quietly, appreciating his calm resourcefulness. He wasn't shaken by the storm. He had a way of grounding the moment, making everything feel manageable. Once the door was secure, he reached toward the small emergency kit on the shelf. Inside were candles and matches. He lit a few and placed them around the room, bringing a soft, warm glow into the space. The light flickered gently, making the old wooden walls seem softer and more welcoming. Alyssa sat on one of the lower bunks, rubbing her chilled hands together. Caleb joined her on the opposite side of the room, giving her enough space to stay comfortable, but close enough that they could speak easily. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, though she was still catching her breath. "Just cold and surprised. The storm came so fast." "It happens sometimes out here," he said. "The land has its own moods." She smiled a little at that. "I'm still trying to learn them." "You're doing better than you think," he replied. His words warmed her more than the candlelight. She didn't always believe she was improving, but hearing it from him, someone who understood the work, deeply meant more than she expected. Outside, the rain continued pounding hard against the roof. The wind made soft whistles through the cracks, but the building stayed solid. The candles cast gentle shadows across Caleb's face, highlighting his thoughtful expression. Alyssa looked around, noticing how time-worn the bunkhouse was. Old boots were lined up beneath the beds, long abandoned by workers from years ago. A faded deck of cards sat on a small table. Everything felt frozen in time. "It feels strange being here," she said after a moment. "I remember coming to the bunkhouse when I was little. My dad used to store extra blankets here. It felt much bigger back then." Caleb glanced around and nodded. "Places look different when we grow up. We notice things we didn't pay attention to before." She thought about that quietly. "Like how much work the ranch really takes," she said. "Exactly." The storm deepened, thunder rolling across the sky like distant drums. Alyssa wrapped her arms around herself for warmth. Caleb noticed and stood up. "Hold on," he said. He checked the storage chest in the corner and pulled out an old but clean blanket. He shook off the dust and handed it to her. She accepted it gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth seeped in quickly, easing the chill. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. But she knew that wasn't completely true. Not everyone was as attentive or thoughtful. Not everyone stayed calm in a storm, both the real kind and the life kind. After a few minutes, she glanced at him again. "You always seem so steady," she said. "Like nothing catches you off guard." He leaned back against the bunk frame. "Everyone gets caught off guard," he said. "I just don't show it much." "Was it like that even before you left town?" she asked gently. He hesitated. A soft, thoughtful silence filled the room. The storm outside seemed to soften, as though giving them space. "No," he said finally. "A lot was different back then." She waited for him to continue, but she didn't pressure him. He chose his words slowly, carefully. "I left because I needed time," he said. "Some things happened in my family, and I didn't know how to face them. So I went away. Tried to figure myself out." Alyssa listened quietly, appreciating his openness. She knew what it felt like to run away from things, even if the reasons were different. "Coming back wasn't easy," he added, "but it feels right now." She nodded. "I think coming back was hard for me too. In a different way. I didn't realize how much I missed my father, or how much this land shaped me." "You're stronger than you think," he said. She met his eyes. "You keep saying that. That's because it's true." His voice carried an honesty that made her heart feel full. She looked down for a moment, letting the warmth of the blanket settle around her. "Sometimes I feel like I'm pretending to be someone who can do all this," she admitted. "Like I'm wearing a version of myself that isn't ready yet." Caleb shook his head gently. "You're not pretending. You're learning. No one steps into something this big and knows everything right away." "Do you ever feel unsure?" she asked. "More times than I can count," he answered with a small smile. "But that's part of living. You just keep going." The softness in his tone made her feel unexpectedly safe. She hadn't felt that in a long time. As the storm continued, they talked quietly, sharing small stories, nothing too deep or painful, just moments from their pasts. Alyssa told him about her life in the city, the noise, the pressure, the way her dreams felt heavy at times. Caleb told her about the places he had traveled, the work he had taken, the people he had met along the way. He never bragged, and he never made things sound dramatic. He described everything with simple honesty. Slowly, the storm weakened. The wind quieted. The rain softened to a gentle tapping against the roof. The candles burned low, their flames swaying lightly. Alyssa felt calmer than she had in weeks. Being stranded in the bunkhouse wasn't part of her plan. But something about the unexpected moment brought a stillness she needed, like the storm had washed away some of her self-doubt. When the rain finally slowed enough for them to consider leaving, Caleb checked outside. The sky was still cloudy but calmer. The fields glistened with rainwater, and the air smelled fresh and clean. "We can head back soon," he said. "But we should walk. The ground's too wet for horses." Alyssa stood, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. The belt still held the door closed, and she smiled slightly at the sight. It felt symbolic in a small way. Caleb, always finding a solution, even when the moment felt chaotic. As they stepped out into the cool, damp air, Alyssa felt something new forming between them. Not something loud or rushed, but quiet and steady. Like the first clear moment after a storm. She didn't know what it meant yet. She didn't know what the future would look like. But she knew one thing for certain. A connection had formed, something soft, something real. And neither the storm nor the long years apart could erase it. The storm left the ranch quieter than usual. The fields shined with leftover rainwater, and the sky carried a soft gray glow that made the world look gentler. Alyssa and Caleb walked back from the bunkhouse slowly, careful on the muddy ground. Even though the storm had passed, something between them felt different now. Something they both sensed but didn't rush to describe. For the next few days, they focused on repairing the damage. Some fences had fallen. The ground had washed out in places, and a few of the smaller structures needed attention. Alyssa worked beside Caleb with renewed determination. She noticed how naturally they moved together, sometimes without speaking. He would reach for a tool just as she handed it to him. She would lift a board just as he stepped forward to secure it. Their teamwork felt smooth, almost familiar, even though they hadn't known each other this closely before. Her father watched from the porch more often now. He saw the way Alyssa concentrated while Caleb guided her gently. He said nothing, but his eyes held a quiet appreciation, both for the help the ranch was receiving and for the change he saw in his daughter. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Alyssa stood beside the pasture, looking at the horizon as the sunset painted soft oranges and pinks across the sky. Caleb walked up beside her, wiping dust from his hands. "Long day," he said with a small smile. She nodded. "Feels like every day is long now." "Not a bad thing," he replied. "Means we're doing something that matters." She turned to him. "Doesn't it ever feel overwhelming? Everywhere I look, something needs fixing. Something needs attention. I just don't know if I can keep up." Caleb leaned against the fence, thoughtful. "It used to overwhelm me too," he admitted. "When I was younger, I thought I had to carry everything alone. But life taught me something important. No one is meant to do everything by themselves." She looked down at her boots, feeling the truth in his words. "I'm still learning that." "You're learning fast," he said gently. His voice wasn't forceful. It wasn't full of empty encouragement. It was simply honest. And that made it feel comforting. Alyssa hesitated, then took a breath. She had been carrying a question in her mind ever since the bunkhouse, but she hadn't known how to ask it. Now, with the calm sunset and Caleb's steady presence, she felt brave enough. "You said you left town because you needed time," she said slowly. "But what happened? If you don't mind telling me." Caleb went quiet, a thoughtful, soft kind of quiet. He didn't turn away, but he didn't answer immediately. She didn't rush him. She waited, giving him space. Finally, he took a deep breath. "My family went through something difficult," he said. "My younger brother started struggling. He felt lost. I tried to help him, but every time I reached out, he pushed me away. I didn't know how to be there for him. I kept thinking I should have been stronger or smarter or more patient." Alyssa listened carefully, her heart softening. Caleb's voice was steady, but she could hear a faint ache beneath it. "One day," he continued, "I realized I wasn't helping anyone by staying. I needed to understand myself better before I could understand the people around me. So I left. I worked on different ranches, met different kinds of people, and slowly, things inside me started to settle." "Did your brother get better?" she asked softly. "Yes," Caleb said with a small, warm smile. "He's doing well now. We talk often, but it took time. We both needed space to grow." Alyssa felt a wave of relief mixed with quiet admiration. She saw him differently now, not just as someone calm and capable, but someone who had walked through his own difficult journey and found peace on the other side. "That must have been hard," she said. "It was," he admitted. "But it taught me something important. Carrying heavy feelings doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Ren. One. Ren to seize. It forning. One. One. One." She nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe I've been trying too hard to look strong." "There's strength in honesty too," Caleb said. "Sometimes more than in anything else." His words settled into her heart like soft rain soaking into dry soil. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out at the fields, feeling something inside her shift. She had tried to act tough since returning home, hiding her fear of failure, hiding her worries for her father, hiding her doubts about staying. But talking with Caleb made her feel like she didn't need to hide everything anymore. Over the next week, Alyssa began to open up more, not only to him but to herself. She allowed herself to admit when she was tired. She allowed herself to laugh more. She allowed herself to share memories of the ranch from her childhood, the ones she had pushed aside while chasing city dreams. Caleb listened to everything with genuine interest. He didn't judge her for leaving or for struggling now. Instead, he asked gentle questions, encouraged her, and shared his own stories when it felt right. One afternoon, after finishing the repairs on a broken gate, they sat on the back steps of the barn, drinking cold water from old metal cups. Alyssa watched the horses grazing nearby. "You know," she said, "I used to think success meant going somewhere far away and becoming someone impressive. And now?" Caleb asked. "Now I'm learning that home can be part of success too," she said quietly. "It doesn't mean I failed. It just means my path changed." Caleb nodded. "Paths change all the time. That's the way life works." "What about you?" she asked. "Do you think you'll stay in town now?" He looked out over the fields, thinking. "I think I might," he said. "For the first time in a long time, it feels right." Alyssa felt a warm flutter in her chest. She didn't ask why it felt right. She didn't need to. Some things didn't need to be spoken yet. As the days passed, her father began to open up to Caleb as well. He asked him questions about the land, appreciated his help, and even shared old stories from when Alyssa was little. Caleb listened with a gentle smile, and Alyssa found herself enjoying their conversations. It felt almost like their small ranch family was slowly growing again. One evening, as they finished repairing the barn roof, the sun dipped behind the hills and cast long shadows across the ranch. Alyssa stood on the ground, while Caleb climbed down the ladder. When he reached the bottom, he paused, catching his breath. "You've done a lot these past weeks," he told her. "More than many people could handle." "I've been trying," she said. "You've been doing," he corrected. "There's a difference." She smiled at that, a quiet, grateful smile. "You make it easier," she admitted softly. Caleb looked at her with gentle eyes. "You make it worth helping." They didn't step closer. They didn't rush anything. They simply stood there in the fading light, sharing a moment that felt warm and honest. A moment that didn't need grand gestures to be meaningful. But despite the growing comfort between them, life on the ranch wasn't without challenges. Alyssa's father grew tired more easily. Some mornings, he needed help getting out of bed. Some afternoons he fell asleep while sitting on the porch. Alyssa watched him with worry, trying to stay strong. Caleb noticed her concern, even when she didn't voice it. "You're carrying a lot," he said one night as they closed up the barn. "I don't want to lose the ranch," she whispered. "You won't," he said gently. "Not as long as you keep fighting for it." She nodded, grateful for his faith in her. And somewhere deep inside, she realized something important. She wasn't just fighting for the ranch anymore. She was fighting for herself, for her father, for the life she was rediscovering, and maybe slowly for a connection she never expected to find. The truth settled in her heart softly. She didn't just want to stay. She finally felt like she belonged. The next few weeks brought a gentle rhythm back to the ranch. Morning sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the barn. The horses settled into their routines, and the fields slowly regained their color after the storm. Alyssa woke each day with a new sense of purpose. She still felt unsure sometimes, but the uncertainty didn't overwhelm her the way it once had. It now felt like a natural part of growth. Caleb became a steady presence around the ranch. He didn't push himself into her life. He simply showed up each day, offering a helping hand, a thoughtful word, or quiet company. Alyssa grew used to seeing him everywhere, repairing fences, checking the livestock, carrying supplies, or talking with her father while sharing a cup of hot tea in the early mornings. Even the local community began noticing the changes. Neighbors who rarely visited before now stopped by to ask how repairs were going. They brought small gifts, fresh bread, homemade jam, or extra seeds for planting. Some said they were glad to see the ranch coming back to life. Others were surprised to see Alyssa taking charge with so much confidence. She didn't feel confident all the time, but hearing their words helped her believe she was on the right path. One afternoon, a neighbor named Mrs. Harlow arrived with a basket of garden vegetables. She was a friendly woman, in her early 60s, who had known Alyssa since childhood. "You've grown into a strong young woman," Mrs. Harlow said warmly as Alyssa accepted the basket. "Your father must be proud." "He is," her father replied from his seat on the porch, smiling gently. "She's always had that strength. She just needed a reason to use it again." Alyssa glanced down shyly, touched by the compliment. She wasn't used to praise, especially in front of others, and it warmed her heart in a way she didn't expect. Caleb stood nearby, fixing a loose bolt in one of the fence posts, and she noticed the small smile that tugged at his lips when he heard her father's words. Later that day, while they finished organizing the hay storage, Caleb dusted his hands off and looked at her thoughtfully. "You've changed a lot since you came back," he said. "In a good way, I hope?" she replied, raising an eyebrow playfully. "In the best way," he said, his voice serious but gentle. "You're finding yourself again." She paused, surprised by how accurately he saw her. She wasn't used to being understood so clearly. "Maybe I am," she admitted. "But I'm still figuring out what that means." "We all are," he replied. "Figuring things out doesn't end. But you're moving forward, and that's what matters." His words stayed with her, echoing in her heart even as they continued working. She realized something important. Caleb didn't just help her fix physical things around the ranch. He helped her fix parts of herself she didn't know were broken. One evening, after a long day, they walked toward the old oak tree near the pond. The sky was painted in soft shades of lavender and gold. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the water reflected the fading colors. Alyssa had loved this spot as a child, but she hadn't visited it much since returning. Somehow, Caleb seemed to know she needed a quiet place. "It's peaceful here," he said, looking out at the pond. "Yeah," she breathed. "I used to come here when I needed to think." He sat down on the grass, and she sat beside him. For a while, they didn't speak. They just listened to the croaking frogs, the rustling leaves, and the soft hum of the evening. "You know," she said after a while, "I didn't realize how much I missed this place. Not just the tree or the pond, but the feeling of being home." Caleb leaned back, resting his hands behind him. "Home isn't a place you find," he said quietly. "It's a place you feel." She turned to him, meeting his calm eyes. "And what about you? Do you feel at home here?" He thought for a moment. "I think I'm starting to." Her heart fluttered at his words. She didn't ask what or who made him feel that way. She simply let the moment settle between them. The next morning, Alyssa woke earlier than usual. She stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and the world felt fresh. She walked to the barn to start her chores, only to find Caleb already there, feeding the horses. "You're early," she said with a sleepy smile. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Thought I'd get a head start." "Anything on your mind?" He hesitated. A rare expression of uncertainty crossed his face. A little. 70. A revering. "Want to talk about it?" "Maybe later," he said gently. "Let's get through the morning first." She didn't push him. Instead, she joined him, and together they worked quietly until the sun rose fully. The golden glow filled the barn, and the horses snorted softly, as if greeting the new day. By afternoon, the air grew warm, and Alyssa's father asked Caleb to help him in the shed. Alyssa stayed back to finish cleaning the stalls. She hummed softly to herself, feeling strangely energized. Later, her father called her over with a small smile. She walked into the shed and found Caleb holding an old wooden box she recognized from her childhood. "What's that?" she asked. Her father gestured toward the box. Thought it might be time to open it again. Alyssa blinked, surprised. I haven't seen that box in years. It's yours, her father reminded her. You packed it before you left for college. I kept it safe. Caleb handed it to her carefully. She placed it on the work table and opened it slowly. Inside were little pieces of her past drawings she made as a child. An old ribbon from a county fair, photos with her parents, a small carved wooden horse her grandfather had given her. Her breath caught slightly. I forgot about these. That's why I wanted you to see them, her father said. Sometimes, remembering who you were helps you understand who you're becoming. Alyssa looked at Caleb, who nodded with a soft smile. Your dad is right, he said. You've grown so much, but you're still the same person who loved this ranch. Emotion washed over her. She closed the box gently and looked between them, her heart warm and full. That night, after they cleaned up and the sky filled with stars, Alyssa sat on the porch swing. Caleb joined her, sitting a comfortable distance away. You seemed a little quiet earlier, she said softly. He looked up at the stars before answering. I was thinking about what your dad said, about remembering who we used to be. She nodded. Did it bring up something for you? It did, he said. I spent so many years trying to be stronger, trying to forget the things that hurt. But maybe forgetting isn't the answer. What is the answer then? She asked gently. He turned to her, his voice calm but honest. Maybe the answer is learning to hold the past without letting it hold you. Alyssa felt something shift inside her, something quiet, something brave. I think you're right, she whispered. They sat in silence for a long time. The porch swing moved gently back and forth, the night air cool around them. In the distance, crickets chirped, and fireflies flickered like tiny stars drifting close to Earth. Eventually, Caleb spoke again. Alyssa? Yes? I'm glad I met you. The words were simple but full of meaning. She felt her chest warm, and she smiled softly. I'm glad I met you too. Nothing more needed to be said. The moment was enough. The days continued like this, full of hard work, quiet conversations, and moments that felt soft and real. Alyssa began to feel more connected, not just to the ranch, but to the life she was building there. The fear she once carried didn't disappear completely, but it grew quieter, less controlling, more manageable. Caleb stayed by her side through it all, not because he felt obligated, but because he truly cared. And every day, Alyssa found herself caring more too. She didn't know where their connection would lead. She didn't need to know yet. All she knew was this. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She felt grounded. She felt ready for whatever came next. And in the quiet corners of her heart, she sensed something blooming slowly, gently, beautifully. Something that felt a little like love.